My name is Caleb Johnson. I'm 32 years old and I live in a quiet, unassuming neighborhood on the outskirts of Salt Lake City. By all accounts, I'm a pretty average person. I work from home as a software developer, a job that involves more quiet concentration than social interaction. I'm not the kind of guy who stands out in a crowd or becomes the center of attention at a party. My days follow a predictable rhythm. I wake up, work, make dinner, maybe catch a basketball game or get lost in a book, and then I turn in for the night. There's not much excitement, and for the most part, I've always preferred it that way. I've been in this same small house for the last 5 years, and my neighbors and I have a comfortable, distant relationship. We exchange waves and polite smiles, but we don't share dinners or deep conversations. I valued the peace, the predictability of it all. At least I used to until everything changed a few nights ago. The house directly next to mine belongs to Sarah Collins. She's 36 with a kind of understated beauty that's more captivating than any flashy glamour. She has these serene blue eyes and a quiet resilience that you can feel just by being near her. She was married to David, a man a bit older than her, probably in his late 40s. Over the years, we traded the usual pleasantries over the fence, but I never truly got to know either of them. They were private people. David always seemed to be in a rush, a man with a perpetual forward momentum, as if he were constantly late for something important. Sarah, in contrast, possessed a stillness, a calm aura that lingered with you long after a brief 30-second exchange about the weather. Last week, David passed away. It was a massive heart attack, completely out of the blue. The news spread through the neighborhood like a quiet shockwave within hours. I didn't attend the funeral. Felt like an intrusion, like I didn't have the right to be there. But the night after he was buried, my routine was shattered. I've been having trouble sleeping, my mind restless. It was just after 3 a.m. when I got up to get a glass of water. As I passed the living room window, a shape in the darkness outside caught my eye. A lone figure was sitting on the front steps of Sarah's house, huddled in the cold. My heart jumped. I squinted trying to make out who it was and realized with a jolt that it was her. She was just sitting there in the dead of night. For a moment, I debated what to do, but I couldn't just leave her. I pulled on a hoodie and shoes and slipped out my front door. The air was crisp and cold. As I approached, she looked up, her eyes wide and red-rimmed in the faint glow of the street lamp. She was clutching a small empty mug. "Hi, Caleb," she whispered, her voice fragile. I just didn't want to be alone in that house. Of course, I told her to come inside. I guided her into my living room, offered her the armchair, and went to the kitchen to put the kettle on. I didn't probe with questions. I sensed she would speak if and when she felt ready. She sat with her hands folded in her lap, her gaze fixed on the floor as if the pattern in the rug held some profound secret. After I brought her a steaming cup of chamomile tea, a long, heavy silence settled between us. She just stared at the tendrils of steam rising from the mug. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, her voice, barely a whisper, broke the stillness. "It's so quiet in there," she said, her words trembling slightly. "I thought I would be okay, but the silence is deafening. I don't want to be alone right now." I simply nodded, telling her she didn't need to offer any explanation. We sat together for a while longer, the only sounds being the soft sips of tea and the ticking of the clock on my wall, letting the silence become a companion rather than an enemy. It wasn't an awkward quiet. It felt strangely comfortable, a shared space of solace. After a time, she began to speak about David, about how their marriage hadn't been what it appeared to be on the surface. She described how over the last few years, a chasm had grown between them, how she often felt more like a caretaker or a roommate than a wife. She wasn't weeping, not in a dramatic way. It was more like she was allowing years of unspoken truth to seep out slow and steady like a leak from a cracked dam. She met my gaze and said, "I know this must sound terrible, but a part of me feels like I've already done my grieving. It feels like I lost him on an emotional level a long time before I lost him physically." I had no idea what to say to that, though. I said very little, just maintained eye contact and nodded, letting her know I was listening. That seemed to be all she needed from me. Before she finally went back to her own home as the sky began to lighten, she took a slow look around my modest living room and offered a faint, tired smile. "Feels warm in here," she commented softly. And then she was gone, slipping back across the lawn to her dark, empty house. But in that pre-dawn quiet, something had fundamentally shifted for both of us. The morning after Sarah had sat in my living room, I found it impossible to focus on my work. There were code reviews waiting, project deadlines looming, and a backlog of emails that required my attention. But my mind was completely preoccupied. All I could picture was her on my armchair clutching that tea mug as if it were a lifeline anchoring her to the present moment. I couldn't pinpoint what it was exactly, but the raw, unvarnished honesty in her voice had worked its way under my skin. Not in an unpleasant way, but it had left a permanent mark. It just echoed in my thoughts. By midday, I realized I hadn't eaten a thing. I was staring blankly at the same block of code I'd been looking at for 20 minutes when I heard a soft knock on my front door. I opened it and there she was again. This time there was no long coat, no pretense. She was wearing simple jeans, a pair of worn sneakers, and a plain gray hoodie that seemed a size too big, hanging from her shoulders as if she'd been living in it for days. In her hands, she held 2 brown paper bags from a local deli, the one a few blocks away that makes the best sandwiches in the neighborhood. "I had a feeling you might forget to eat," she said, managing a small, tentative smile. "I almost did, too. I thought I'd bring us some lunch if that's okay." She didn't wait for me to respond, just stepped past me into the house as if it were a familiar, natural thing to do. And for some reason, it felt completely right. We ended up on my small back patio. The sky above was a blanket of muted gray, but the air was cool and carried the fresh scent of approaching rain. She passed me a turkey and Swiss on rye and we both just sat there. The only sound the quiet crinkling of paper as we unwrapped our sandwiches. We didn't say anything at first and I didn't feel the need to fill the silence. She took small deliberate bites, her gaze fixed on the line of aspen trees that bordered my backyard as if her mind were miles away. After a few moments, she was the one to break the quiet. "Is so strange," she began, her voice low and contemplative. "I thought I would feel more shattered, you know? I imagined I'd wake up every day screaming or crying, something dramatic, but instead, I just feel hollow, like I'm a ghost walking through somebody else's life." I glanced over at her, but she didn't turn to meet my eyes. She kept them trained on the distant trees. "I've been carrying this knot in my chest for so long, Caleb, even before David passed. It's like the grief began years ago, back when things between us started to change, when we stopped really connecting with each other." I let her words hang in the air, giving her the space to continue without interruption. I just sat there and listened. She let out a long, slow sigh before continuing. "We used to be so close. I truly did love him. But then his career became all-consuming. He started traveling more, coming home later and talking less. I found myself eating dinner by myself. Even on nights when he was physically in the house, we shared a bed, but it might as well have been a continent between us." She finally turned to face me, her blue eyes a little glassy but unwavering. "Have you ever had that feeling? Like you're slowly becoming invisible inside your own home?" I gave a slow nod. Not because I'd experienced that exact situation, but because I understood the profound loneliness she was describing. I think most people do in one way or another. A moment of silence passed and then she let out a soft, almost self-conscious laugh. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to unload all of this on you. I didn't have anyone else to talk to. You don't have to apologize." I told her sincerely. "Sometimes you just need a person to sit with you." She gave me a look then, one that was grateful and maybe a little surprised. For the next hour, our conversation shifted. We didn't talk about David anymore or about loss. We talked about small, ordinary things, our favorite movies, the best coffee shops in the city, the time she tried to adopt a stray cat that ended up running away after a week. I told her about the time in a previous job when I accidentally sent a company-wide email with a typo in the subject line that read pubic meeting instead of public meeting. She laughed at that, a genuine full-throated laugh. And for that brief moment, she looked like someone who still had reservoirs of joy left inside her. At one point, As we sat at the small patio table, I felt the back of her hand brush against mine. It lingered there for a beat, just long enough for the contact to register with both of us before she gently pulled it away. Her expression shifted, a flicker of something, maybe guilt or perhaps just confusion crossing her features. "I should probably go," she said abruptly, pushing her chair back and standing. "This is likely too soon. I don't want you to think I'm just using you as some kind of emotional crutch." I stood up as well. "You're not," I said, and I meant it with every fiber of my being. She paused at the patio door. "I just really didn't want to be alone today." I nodded in understanding. "Then don't be. Anytime you need to talk or even just not talk, my door's open." There was a tangible weight to the silence that hung between us then, as if we were both aware of something happening, but neither of us was ready to give it a name. It was a shift, a warmth, an unexpected closeness that had taken us both by surprise. She gave a slow, deliberate nod. "Thank you, Caleb." "Really?" With that, she stepped outside and walked across the stretch of grass separating our yards. I watched her go, her arms wrapped around her chest, a gust of wind catching her hair. Something had definitely changed. I couldn't articulate it, but I knew we had crossed an invisible boundary. Nothing physical had transpired beyond that fleeting touch. No kiss, no embrace, but an unspoken connection had sparked between us, and I had a feeling it wasn't going to just fade away. The following day began with a quiet stillness. It was an overcast morning with the kind of heavy, damp air that hinted at rain hanging low over the valley. I sat at my kitchen table, a lukewarm cup of coffee cradled in my hands, attempting to sort through my inbox, but my focus was shot. My thoughts kept drifting, circling back to Sarah. It wasn't just that she had come over again. It was the feeling her presence left behind. It lingered in the rooms of my house long after she was gone. I couldn't shake her words from my mind or the way she had looked at me with that complex mixture of loss and a strange budding familiarity. And then there was that moment, just a feather-like brush of our hands on the patio table, but it had imprinted itself on my memory like something far more significant. Sometime after I'd given up on work for lunch, I found myself walking over to the window that overlooked her backyard. I told myself I wasn't specifically looking for her, but a part of me knew I was. And there she was, standing near the edge of her wooden porch, her arms wrapped tightly around her midsection as if she were trying to physically hold herself together. She looked so small from this distance, so uncertain, like a person standing on the precipice of a decision they weren't sure they should make. 10 minutes crawled by, then 15, and then the familiar soft knock sounded at my door. I knew it was her before I even turned the handle. Sarah stood on my porch, this time in a deep navy blue sweater that hung just slightly off one shoulder and a pair of simple black leggings. She wore no makeup, no jewelry. It was just her. She looked utterly exhausted, yet her eyes held a quiet intensity, the look of someone who had been wrestling with their own thoughts for hours. "Can I come in?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Of course," I said, stepping back without a second of hesitation. She walked past me and into the living room, just as she had before. But her movements were slower this time, more tentative, as though she were questioning her own right to be there. I didn't rush her. I just stood for a moment, watching as she scanned the room as if hoping it might offer her some kind of answer. "I wasn't planning on coming over," she said after a long moment. "I've been pacing in my house for the last hour, going back and forth, but I just didn't know where else to go." "You don't need a reason," I replied gently. Sarah moved toward the couch and curled up on one end, drawing her knees to her chest like someone needing to feel small and protected for a little while. I took the armchair across from her, giving her a comfortable amount of space. The room was quiet for a bit, filled only by the distant hum of traffic and the steady ticking of my old wall clock. "I don't know how to be alone," she finally confessed, her voice breaking the silence. "I went from my parents' house straight to living with David. That's the only life I've ever known. There was always someone else there. Now it's just me." I nodded slowly. "That's a huge adjustment." She let out a shaky breath. "The thing is, I felt alone for a very long time, even before he died. It's like I was already mourning the end of our relationship long before he was actually gone. Her words were heavy with a truth that I could tell was difficult for her to admit. I leaned forward, resting my elbows on my knees. That kind of loneliness is its own kind of brutal, I said. It's different when someone is physically present but emotionally a million miles away. She looked at me, then her gaze direct and searching. Her voice dropped even lower. Do you think it's wrong that I don't feel guilty for being here? That I don't feel guilty for talking to you like this so soon after everything? I didn't rush to give an answer. I wanted to choose my words with care. No, I said, my voice firm but gentle. I don't think there's a rulebook or a timeline for grief or for connection. Sometimes people come into our lives at the exact moment we need them the most. That doesn't make it wrong. Her eyes seemed to soften as if she'd been holding her breath, waiting for my judgment. I just never expected to feel drawn to someone right now. She whispered almost to herself. Neither did I admitted honestly. She looked down at her hands, fidgeting with the hem of her sweater sleeve. I don't want to go back to that house tonight. Not because I'm trying to run away from it, but because I can't bear to sit in that silence again. I feel like I'm going to suffocate. I could hear the raw desperation in her voice. It wasn't melodrama or an exaggeration. It was a woman who had reached the absolute limit of what she could endure on her own. You don't have to explain, I said quietly. If you need a place to just breathe, I can make up the guest room for you. Sarah blinked rapidly, a film of tears shimmering in her eyes. I didn't expect you to say that. You're not alone in this, Sarah. She nodded slowly, and for the first time all day, the corner of her mouth lifted into a tiny, fragile smile. Later that evening, I pulled clean sheets and a spare comforter from the hall closet and made up the bed in the spare room while she sat in the living room, quietly sipping the chamomile tea I'd prepared for her. We didn't talk much more. The silence between us felt natural now, even comforting. Before she turned in for the night, she approached me in the hallway, her movements quiet and deliberate. Thank you, Caleb, she said softly, for all of this, for not asking too many questions, for just making me feel like a person again. And then she stepped forward and wrapped her arms around me. It wasn't a romantic gesture, nor was it rushed. It was simply human. Her head rested gently against my shoulder, and I held her with both arms, trying to offer a steady, calm presence. It was the kind of hug you don't easily forget. When we finally pulled apart, she whispered, "Good night," and disappeared down the hall into the guest room. I stood there for a long moment, alone in the quiet of my house, the warmth of her embrace still lingering on my skin. And for the first time in a very long time, I recognized that my predictable life had irrevocably changed. I didn't get much sleep that night. It wasn't because anything had happened. It hadn't. But I was just acutely aware of everything. Aware that Sarah was just down the hall. Aware of the immense weight she was carrying, and aware that this situation was far more complex than a neighbor simply crashing for a night. This was a woman who had just buried her husband and who, for reasons she might not even fully grasp herself, had chosen to seek refuge in my home. The walls of my house seemed thinner. Every creak of the floorboard seemed amplified, and my thoughts refused to quiet down. I kept replaying the hug in the hallway. It wasn't passionate or dramatic. It was profoundly human, deeply honest. It was the kind of embrace you don't forget. Not because of what it might lead to, but because of how desperately needed it felt in that moment. When the first hints of dawn finally began to streak the sky, I gave up on sleep and got out of bed. The house was completely silent. I moved with deliberate slowness, not wanting to wake her. I started a pot of coffee, the aroma slowly filling the kitchen, and stood by the window, holding the warm mug in both hands, watching the soft morning light spill over the peaks of the Wasatch Mountains. About 20 minutes later, I heard the soft, cautious sound of her footsteps in the hallway, as if she were uncertain whether she was intruding. She appeared in the kitchen doorway, wrapped in a light gray blanket from the guest room. Her hair was tousled from sleep, her expression calm, but visibly tired. She was still beautiful, but in a different way now, more raw, more real. "Morning," she said quietly. "Hey," I replied with a small welcoming smile. I made coffee. She nodded, stepping further into the kitchen and accepting the mug I offered her. We stood there for a while in companionable silence, just sipping our coffee. There was something about that quiet that wasn't awkward at all. It was restful. Eventually, she moved to the small kitchen table and sat down, pulling the blanket more tightly around her shoulders. She gazed out the window for a long moment before speaking. "I have absolutely no idea what I'm doing," she confessed. I took the seat across from her. "I don't think you're supposed to, Sarah. I think you're just figuring it out 1 minute at a time. That's more than enough." She nodded slowly in response. I keep thinking about how it felt yesterday just sitting here talking, being able to breathe. Felt like I got a tiny piece of myself back. Then she looked directly at me, her eyes holding something I couldn't quite name. Not romance, not confusion, but a profound depth. David and we weren't really a couple anymore. We lived in the same house, shared a life on paper, but emotionally we were two complete strangers occupying the same space. I didn't even realize how empty I had become until I walked out of that house. I just listened, not interrupting. I could tell this was something she needed to articulate, to say out loud to another person. "I came here yesterday because I couldn't stand the silence anymore," she continued. "And now I don't want to go back. Not yet." She ended up staying for the entire day. We didn't create a formal plan. Her presence just became a natural part of the day's rhythm. I made us some scrambled eggs and toast for a late breakfast. She helped me sort a load of laundry, and we both laughed when she held up a single rogue pink sock that had somehow infiltrated my whites. At one point in the afternoon, we went for a walk around the neighborhood, just a slow, casual loop under the gray sky. We didn't hold hands, but our shoulders brushed against each other a few times as we walked, a small, unspoken point of contact. The day unfolded gently without pressure. That evening I cooked us dinner, a simple pasta with a fresh salad. Afterward, we found ourselves on the couch in the living room. She tucked her legs up underneath her, holding a cup of herbal tea in both hands. I sat beside her, close but not touching. A nature documentary was playing on the television, but neither of us was really paying attention to it. Then, in the quiet of the room, she said, "It's strange. I feel a sense of peace here, like I'm allowed to just exist without any expectations. I haven't felt that in so long." I turned to look at her. "You don't have to rush anything," I said softly. "There's no script for what you're going through." She looked up at me then, her eyes searching mine for something. Permission perhaps, or just understanding. "Do you think it's wrong that I don't feel bad about being here with you?" She asked again, the question still weighing on her. "No," I said gently. "I think you're doing what you need to do to heal. There's nothing wrong with that." Her head slowly came to rest against my shoulder. I let her stay there, and my arm naturally found its way around her. Not in a forceful or suggestive way, but just to be a steady presence. And then in that quiet moment, the atmosphere shifted. She tilted her head up to look at me, our faces closer than they had ever been before. Her gaze lingered on mine. I could feel the warmth of her breath. And then slowly, so tentatively, she leaned in. Her lips met mine softly, carefully, like a question she wasn't entirely sure she should be asking. We kissed for only a moment. Nothing rushed, no fireworks, just a profound sense of connection. Two people trying to feel something other than pain. She pulled back slightly. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "You don't have to be," I replied, my own voice quiet. We didn't kiss again. She leaned back into me, this time resting her head against my chest. And we stayed like that for what felt like an hour, just being quiet and still together. Something had fundamentally changed, and neither of us seemed to want to name it out loud. I think at the time I didn't fully comprehend how deep the connection between us had already grown. In the beginning, we were just two people figuring out how to navigate the difficult circumstances we had been handed. But as the days turned into a week, something about the simplicity of our shared moments, the morning coffees, the quiet evenings, the easy conversation began to feel like something more, something real. It wasn't a sudden or dramatic transformation. It was a gradual shift that began after that quiet night when Sarah had stayed over and we had shared that one gentle, hesitant kiss. A kiss that felt more like a question neither of us was ready to answer. We didn't immediately fall into a romance. In fact, after that night, we both seemed to instinctively pull back a little, creating a small pocket of space. We both needed time to think, to process what was happening between us. But the space wasn't awkward. It felt necessary and natural. Neither of us was prepared to dive head first into something new so quickly. We both needed to move at our own pace. For the next several days, Sarah stayed in her own house. She told me she wasn't ready to abandon it completely, and I understood. She needed to face that space, to clean it, to sort through the memories that lingered in its walls. But she still came over every single day. Sometimes just for coffee in the morning, other times for a long conversation in the afternoon. It was a ritual of comfort. The grief was still present, a heavy weight on her heart, but a quiet, steady companionship was growing between us. One that didn't demand grand gestures or overwhelming confessions of feeling. I would have the coffee ready in the mornings and we'd sit on my couch sipping it in comfortable silence or sharing whatever was on our minds. Sometimes she would cry, letting out the sadness that still came in waves. Other times she would laugh at something silly I did. Like the time I spilled coffee all over the kitchen counter, and my clumsy attempt to clean it up only spread the mess further. I found myself smiling more than I had in years. Something about her presence was slowly bringing me back to life, gently and steadily, and in turn, I could see she was changing too. Her eyes, which had been so clouded with sorrow, began to hold a different light. Her smiles became more frequent, even if they were small at first. Her laughter started to come more freely. She began talking about the future, about things she had forgotten she enjoyed before. Her life had been consumed by a quiet unhappiness. I could see her rediscovering herself piece by piece. It wasn't a fast or easy process, but with each day we spent together, I could see that she was healing. Not completely, grief doesn't just disappear, but she was learning how to live alongside it. And as time went on, I realized that in my own way, I was learning how to do the same. Then one Saturday about a month later, she invited me to her house for dinner. I hadn't set foot inside since Davis's passing, and I felt a knot of nerves tighten in my stomach as I walked across the lawn. Her house, after all, was the epicenter of her loss. The place she had felt so suffocated. The place where her husband had once been a constant presence. But she was the one who had asked me to come. And this time it felt different. Felt like a significant step forward. I brought a bottle of red wine. She had cooked a simple but comforting dinner of pasta and a fresh salad. We ate outside on our back patio as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. The evening air was cool and pleasant, the kind of night where you can just sit back and appreciate the stillness of the world. We didn't talk a great deal during dinner. We didn't have to. The conversation flowed easily, as if this were something we had been doing for years. There was no pressure, no heavy expectations, just the soft clinking of forks against plates, the distant hum of the city, and the occasional shared glance when one of us said something that made the other smile. As the night deepened, the sky turned to indigo, and the soft glow from the patio string lights cast a gentle warmth between us. That's when she looked at me, her expression different from any I had seen before. The sadness in her eyes was no longer the dominant feature. It had been replaced by something steadier, something more certain. "I think I'm ready," she said, her voice clear in the quiet night. "Ready for what?" I asked, genuinely unsure of where the conversation was headed. "Ready to let myself move forward," she explained. "I've been stuck for so long, Caleb, and I didn't know how to get out of it. But when I'm with you, I feel like I can. Not just because of you, but because you help me see that it's okay to move on, that my life doesn't have to be defined by what I've lost." Her words landed with more force than I had anticipated. I didn't respond at first. Instead, I just reached across the small table and took her hand in mine. Felt right, completely natural. I didn't need to say anything. She knew I understood. I knew too. She smiled in a real open smile that lit up her entire face. And in that moment, I realized just how far she had come in such a short period of time. This wasn't just about her getting over the past anymore. It was about her finding something new, something unexpected, but something undeniably good. I don't need to rush it to anything, she continued, her thumb gently stroking the back of my hand. But when I picture a future now, you're in it. And that means something to me. It was my turn to smile. A wave of warmth and a bit of happy nervousness washing over me. I don't need to rush either, I said softly. We can take it as slow as we need to. But I want to be there with you, Sarah. I think we both deserve that. The silence that followed wasn't heavy or uncertain. It was full of a deep mutual understanding. There were no more questions, just a shared certainty that whatever came next, we would face it together. From that point on, things were different. We didn't launch into a whirlwind romance. We didn't need that. We took our time. We continued to have our quiet mornings together and our long evenings filled with conversation or just the simple act of being in the same room. We cherished the simplicity of our companionship, and as the days turned into weeks, we found ourselves leaning on each other more and more. We never rushed, but slowly, organically, we both came to realize that we had found something real, something worth protecting and nurturing. A few months later, after countless shared dinners and quiet nights, I found myself waking up next to her every morning. It wasn't the loud, chaotic, dramatic kind of love you read about in novels or see in movies. It was the kind that felt steady and true, built on a foundation of mutual respect and genuine care. It wasn't about grand gestures. It was about the small, everyday things, the shared moments over coffee, the quiet support during a tough day, the easy laughter. I was happy, truly happy, and so was she. And that's how I knew it was the right kind of ending, or rather the right kind of beginning. It was the kind where we both found a way to move forward, not by forgetting the past, but by refusing to let it define our future. And just like that, what started as a story about grief had become a story about healing and about the quiet, beautiful surprise of a second dance.